So my name is Jackie Lynham, and on behalf of the Dublin UNESCO City of Literature team, I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening to the Royal Irish Academy for our One Dublin One Book event. One Dublin One Book is a Dublin City Council initiative, and it's supported by the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. And this year's chosen book, if you don't already know, is The Coroner's Daughter by Andrew Hughes, and published by Transworld. And we're delighted to have Andrew here this evening, along with the state pathologists, Dr. Heidi Okkers and Dr. Jill Roman, and they will be in conversation with Conor Brady. So the event this evening is one of the first events in our calendar. We have a whole month of events planned. So if we would urge you to check out onedublinonebook.ie to see what else is happening over the month. There are lots of events. Some of them are booked up already, but we do have lots of library events happening right across the city. So do check it out, and they're all free. But do book, as I said, some of them are booked out. And this event will be recorded, and we're recording a few of our events, so you can check it back on the Dublin City of Literature YouTube channel in the next few days. So do tell your friends about it if you enjoyed the event this evening, just to check it up online. So I want to say a huge thank you to Hugh and the Royal Irish Academy for allowing us to use their beautiful room here this evening. I'm sure you'll agree it's an absolutely stunning venue. And a special thank you to Julianne Mooney and her team for all their help in organising this event. So I'm going to hand you over to this evening's host, Conor Brady. Conor Brady is the author of the Joe Swallow crime novel set in the 19th century Dublin, and is a historian of Irish policing. And he was the editor of the Irish Times from 1986 to 2002. So I hope you enjoyed this evening's event. Thanks, Conor.
Thanks indeed, and a great welcome to everybody. It's wonderful to see a full house. I was saying to Andrew before we came in here, I remember my late colleague Maeve Binchy telling me about her first book tour in the Midwest of America, where she went into some small town and into the hall where she was to give the reading, and there was a man inside, and he kept on looking under the chairs. She said, well, that's not too bad, there's one person here. And eventually she asked him what he was doing. He said, I'm the dog catcher, there's a dog in here somewhere. But it's great to see a full house, and I suppose there's nothing like a bit of gore and gristle to get Dubliners out for an evening's entertainment. We have a really interesting panel here this evening, and I know we're going to have a stimulating conversation, and we'll try to keep it as good-humoured and as light as we can. But there are times when I suppose we will be going into somewhat dark territory. We'll try not to go too deeply into it. Andrew, as you know, is the author of this wonderful book set in Dublin in the early years of the 19th century. It's at once a crime novel, it's at once a psychological thriller, and it's at once it's a sociological history of Dublin at that time. A very different Dublin from even the period that I've written about. The Swallow series is set at the end of the 19th century, when Dublin, if you like, commercial and social Dublin has moved south of the river. In the early years of the 19th century, the north side, Capel Street, Rutland Square, that whole area was where the quality folk lived. So it's a really interesting sociological excursion into Dublin as it was. Many of you will also, of course, know Andrew from the Convictions of John Delahunt, another wonderful book which came out of his work as an archivist. The two ladies, Heidi and Jill, are fresh from their slab side activities in the pathologists. I was asking them earlier on. They've both come to us from South Africa, from Stellenbosch, which is quite an extraordinary coincidence. But we're very lucky to have them, and very welcome they are indeed, both professionally and personally. I was asking them earlier on, was there any possibility of a man ever getting a job in the pathologist's office? I think the entire professional staff is female at this stage. So something will have to be done about that. But that's another day's work. Anyway, we're going to start by asking Andrew to do us a short reading from the coroner's daughter, and then we're going to have a general conversation about forensics as they were in the 19th century, forensics as they are now, then and now, and a bit of in between. And then for the last 15-20 minutes or so, I would hope to open up the discussion to the floor. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. If we can structure that way, if everybody's happy to go that way, then we'll hear from our three speakers, and then we can go on to a more informal conversation. The audience is small enough to allow us to do that, and we're going to finish up shortly after 8 o'clock. Right, Andrew.
Thank you, Conor,
You're on.
for that introduction. Thank you, Jill and Heidi, for being here. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you all for coming. As Conor said, it's wonderful to have a full house. I'm going to do a short reading. This reading comes from early on in the novel. Abigail is collecting her father from the College of Surgeons in York Street, where he's giving a lecture. She grows tired of waiting for him, so she sneaks into the anatomical theatre, where he's working with a cadaver. He's demonstrating the test to discover mercury poisoning. And how that worked was that you would take the contents of the stomach, put it in a glass tube and heat it up, and then place a copper strip over the fumes. And if mercury was present, the copper would take on a silver colour. So that is just what has happened. The tip of the copper glinted in the lamplight. It was so pleasing to think that such tiny particles of mercury, dredged up from the dregs of a man's life, could leave such an elegant indicator. I looked around the theatre, expecting the students to be enthralled by the demonstration, but they slouched in their seats, drowsy and indifferent. Father hadn't spoken for a few moments, and I noticed him peering upwards towards the back of the hall where I was standing. He frowned and straightened his lips, but then looked down, perhaps conscious of others following his gaze. He took a piece of cloth to drape over the body, but then he hesitated, for the cloth wasn't large enough to hide both the internal and external organs. Before he could choose which was the more indecent, I slipped out and made my way back to the carriage. After a few minutes, students began to emerge from the college in ones and twos, lifting their lapels against the breeze. Father was among the last to leave. He walked towards the carriage slowly, opened the door, and climbed in to sit beside me. He didn't say anything as we set off, just rifled in his satchel to arrange some papers while I looked at the passing houses. I heard him take a breath and say, "Abigail." Father, I had no idea that the test for mercury could produce such a clear result. "Abigail, what were you doing up there?" "I only went looking for you," I said. "I didn't know that you would be working with a cadaver." "But why would you stay for so long? You know that you cannot come to places where such things are displayed. It is just not fair," I said. "Proper." He still wore the scarf I had given him that morning, and he loosened it around his neck. "What if others had seen you?" "I'm sure they could have coped," I said. "But you know what people are like. Why risk having them say that you are fixated by such morbid subjects? If I were a young man, they would say I was fascinated by them." Father said, "You know that I have always been proud of your curiosity. It's a great consolation to be able to share my interests with you, but there are other, more important things that I must consider, especially now that your mother is gone. Your reputation, your future, even matrimony." "Father, please," I said. He held up his hand. "I am just mentioning it for you to be aware. There is no need to discuss it today." We remained silent for the remainder of the journey. The rain turned mizzling, then stopped altogether, though the road was still muddy as we approached the house. I said, "Father," and he looked at me, "are there other tests like the one you carried out today, tests to detect the presence of poison?" He said that there were, though they varied depending on whether the poison was mineral or vegetable. "Will you show them to me?" I said. "If it stops you from sneaking into the anatomical theatre, then yes. After all," he said, reaching for his hat, "all the tools we need are here."
You can almost get the smell of the Liffey off that, can't you? Heidi, let me just start with you. Andrew has just described the the curiosity with which Abigail approaches what's happening, her father's work, and the sense of wanting to be involved in it with him. Tell us a little bit about what drew you into this, if I say rather morbid specialty within medicine. Rather than dealing with living patients, you wanted to deal with dead patients. So explain that journey to us.
For me, it's actually a strange one because so I was working in obstetrics and gynecology for 4 years, and I think after a while I just got so over it, and I didn't want to see adult people, and I didn't want to deal with live people anymore. But actually, I wanted to specialize in surgery because I like the trauma and the adrenaline rush type of thing.
Yeah.
But then I never went into surgery. Somebody then advised me, because I liked CSI and those type of shows on TV. So somebody advised me to think about or consider forensics. And then I was like, oh, right, yes, I can actually do that. So then I went for the interview and I got the job. And then that just happened. And then I qualified and I love it. So that's how I got it.
And no regrets about leaving the living?
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
I suppose one thing about your patients is they're very uncomplaining for the most part, which must be a consolation.
And there's always a story that we have to kind of figure out. So.
I had an uncle, an elderly uncle, a GP down the country many years ago, and he was always complaining to the people who come into me, they're always sick. Jill, tell me about your journey into pathology.
My mother used to love watching reality TV. If it wasn't, if it wasn't, Jerry Springer, then it would be Dr. G. And Dr. G is a forensic medical examiner based in America. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her, but there was a show on our satellite TV that used to come on, and she would watch all the episodes, and she said to me, Jill, why don't you do this? And that was actually the first time that I thought about it, because I never thought of myself doing this kind of work. I love working with children, which I did for a little while, and then I loved psychiatry. But then a good friend of mine, I was working in psychiatry, and I was supposed to do a ward round to write up seclusions for psychotic aggressive patients. And she helped me out. She covered one of the wards. And it was supposed to be me going to the ward. She helped me out, and she got attacked. She got hit with a sheban, one of the women in the seclusion ward.
Wow.
Hit her with a sheban, and then I thought to myself, maybe it's not such a good idea. Maybe better, dead than
Yes.
not so well. But I've got huge respect for psychiatrists, obviously, and I love the field still, but that is what spurred it all on. Yeah, my mother's motivation, and that incident made me think again.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm hearing from both of you almost is that you sort of considered pathology almost as a sort of a soft option, easier than actually dealing with real life living patients.
Yeah.
But so what's the downside of it? What's the Heidi? What's the worst part of it?
Well, I think maybe it depends on the person. For me, there's no downside.
Really?
Yes, no. I love every scene, every case. Everything is different, interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
But I think somebody else might now have a different opinion.
So talk about the typical day. Tell us about your typical day.
Well, because we're only 4 in the country currently, Jill's recently joined us. So if one of us are on call for a week in a month, so from a Friday to a Friday, then we're on call for any suspicious death, so it can be all around Ireland. So Cork, Galway, Limerick, Donegal. I did the Creaslow explosion cases. I was there for 2-3 days to do those cases. And then we do the suspicious cases. That's for the week. Then after that, once you've completed that week, then you have to do all your reporting, dictate the cases, go through the files, go through, maybe have another meeting with the detectives or the investigation team. Then you have to look at the histology, the sections you've taken from all the organs, compile that with your report, toxicology. So it's quite a lot that goes into one report.
Yeah.
That's what we'll do the rest of the time. But then we also teach. We lecture all over Ireland, Trinity, Galway, UCD, RCSI. So a lot of teaching. There's always students at the office. So, and we do the coroners, the non-suspicious cases, so the routine post-mortems.
Okay. So there's no such thing as a typical day. It's entirely unpredictable. Yeah.
Yes.
That makes yeah. What about court? What about court appearances?
It's part of our core duty.
Yeah.
Especially in homicides or suspicious deaths, where there's a suspect. We get called to court as expert witnesses to present our autopsy findings as evidence, or to give, opinions based on our knowledge and expertise and experience. And also we go to, for non-suspicious deaths, or we go to inquest court.
Okay.
So it's part of our regular core duty to go to court.
Was that part of your training when you were in college to deal with the adversarial nature of the court system and how to deal with questions?
Not at all. The only way I actually knew how to deal with it was when I came here and I did a professional witness course.
Okay.
And then it kind of teaches you, how to sit in court, how to approach the barrister, sit to the side facing the judge, that type of thing. But in South Africa, we were never taught that.
We were informally taught, but it wasn't formal,
Okay.
so.
Like kind of lab.
And it wasn't examined.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just something you had to pick up.
Something you had to pick up.
Yeah.
You would go with a more senior qualified specialist to court and see how they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, tell me, Jill, and I'll put this to you first. Can you give us a really interesting, surprising example of some of the work that you've come across, even in your relatively short time here?
There's not a lot of, like autopsy examples. So in South Africa, there's a lot of traumatic and violent deaths, but I haven't seen someone using a samurai sword in the form of suicide before, impaling it through their chest and torso. So that was weird.
And was that here in Ireland?
In Ireland, yeah.
Right.
I thought I saw almost everything, but that was a first.
I think the audience would probably generally share your surprise at that. All right, it's not the kind of thing you come across every day.
No. That was, one wonders what goes through somebody's mind. But yeah, definitely different profile of cases.
And in that situation, then, I mean, do you have a role then in trying to ascertain is that really suicide, or is it possible that there was somebody else involved?
That's always part of your role. You get the proposed history.
Yes.
You also, as a routine, we sit with the investigating officers, the guardian and investigating officers.
Yes.
We do a debriefing session. So we go through the scene, we look at the scene photographs. They would tell us about information that they, managed to obtain from people that they've interviewed. We may or may not get to view CCTV footage, but we always go into the autopsy room with an objective mind. And the question is always to determine the cause of death and the mechanism of death. and then to see whether it correlates with the history.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that you write up a report at the end. You tell a story, as it were, of how you think this event happened.
Yeah.
With all the evidence that you have. So in that sense, it requires some, I won't say imagination, but you have to kind of put an order of events and attach certain wounds and circumstances that you know about and create this story to tell what happened in a moment.
That's kind of how it is.
So what can you advance on the samurai sword? Is there anything more dramatic than that?
I've never seen as much samurai sword incidents as what I've seen here, that's for sure.
Really?
No, but I've come, well, in Ireland there's quite a few like fallen down the stairs incidents, quite a lot of those. And what we have to determine, the question is always, so were they pushed?
Yeah.
Or did they fall?
Yeah.
So that's what we have to kind of
Sure.
determine. And the detectives they definitely rely on what our findings are.
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, we can't tell. We have to base it on correlation with what they found
Sure.
and what was found. You know, trace evidence at the scene, but they still only listen to what we say. So that kind of makes it a bit difficult. But most of the time,
Is there a point at which you have to say this? It is not my role here to try to put myself into the mind of the person who has been involved in this. That where you have to stop at the physics and the chemistry.
yes, no, we always do that.
Do you? And how does one draw that line? At what point do you hand it over to the crime investigator, to the detective, and say, yeah?
I think so. For me, a lot of the times the or the detective would want to show me CCTV footage, and I usually say I don't want to see it because it tends to. There's been a few cases where we go to court and then they say, "Oh, we're biased because we've seen the CCTV footage," so that gives us one type of perspective or opinion. So I decline the CCTV footage, and then I just want the history.
Yeah.
You know, what happened, the general circumstances, and then I will make my conclusion based on that. So I'll do the full examination, and then once that's completed, then I'll kind of tell them, okay, this is what I found. Is it similar to what you found on the CCTV footage? And then that's how we correlate.
Yeah, so you go into it unbiased, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember talking to Jack Harbison, who was for many, many years, many of the audience will remember Jack Harbison as the state pathologist. He was a rather eccentric character. He used to go around with a deerstalker hat like Sherlock Holmes. But I remember having a drink with him one evening, and I was saying to him, it really must be very, very tough work and very tough psychologically. And he said, no, he said, it's cold and it's wet and it's miserable and you're out in the ditches. But he said, basically you're dealing with physics and chemistry. And but he said the people who really have the tough job are the people who have to put their minds in, who have to get inside the minds of the people who've done these things. And I remember he was really very passionate about that. That his care and his concern for the crime detectives, as he said, I just go down, I measure things, I weigh things, I do tests, and I go home. But these guys have got to get inside the heads of the people who've done these terrible things. And at the time, of course, I mean, I remember him saying that, you know, that for the crime detectives in those days, there were no supports. There was no clinical supervision. There was no debriefing. There was no psychological support services for them. Really, I presume they're a lot better now, but certainly in those days there weren't any. Andrew, I want to come back to the book again, if I may, for a bit. What your original focus as an archivist was on the great houses of the south side of Dublin, Fitzwilliam Square. Out of that came John Delahunt. So what brought you to the north side? What brought you over to Rutland Square and Capel Street?
I suppose it might have just been for a change of scenery. It was true what you mentioned earlier on, how at a certain time the north side was the more fashionable side of the city. It was when the Earl of Kildare built his house where the Dáil now sits in 1745, and he said very confidently at the time, "Wherever I go, fashion will follow me." And
they
so
did.
He brought his influence to the south, and that happened. And it was also the case that the streets and squares of Merrion Square, Fitzwilliam Square, and so on are all part of the Fitzwilliam Estate. That became the Pembroke Estate in 1816, just a fluke, the same year as the book. But because of that, that whole Pembroke Estate, which is a huge area, was kept under the supervision of one entity, and it was managed as a single entity, and because of that, it was maintained to a much higher standard. Okay. Whereas the Gardner Estate north of the river, which is Rutland Square, Mountjoy Square, and so forth, was split up. It was sold off piece by piece, and single houses fell into disrepair, then a whole terrace would fall into disrepair, and bit by bit, the north side became less fashionable. And it was also the case that after the Act of Union, because of the flight of money and influence to London, there just wasn't the demand for these houses anymore. So, they congregated to a certain side, one side of the river or the other. It happened that the south side turned out to be the more fashionable. But it was nice to be able to take this moment in time in 1816 and set the book north of the river, in the final kind of years of the heyday of this particular area.
And you do that really well. You have the sense of a very elegant urban landscape, beautiful houses, churches, and when you contrast it with what subsequently happened to that part of Dublin, I mean, it's come back somewhat from what it was.
Yeah.
But if you compare it to what happened to it, say by the early years of the 20th century, when it had literally become a huge urban slum with tenements and people living in appalling conditions, it actually asks the reader to make a significant leap of the imagination to go back and see that Dublin in the elegance and the prosperity that you describe.
Yeah, but a lot of those buildings are still there, and so you can see them, and you can imagine it. I was part of a writers group. I have been for 10 years. A writers workshop that we meet every week, and that's we help each other with our books. We would meet in the Gresham, and so I would be walking home from the Gresham to Drumcondra. Yeah. And so I remember just passing through Parnell Square, looking around, going, "Why don't I set my next book here?"
Yes.
Seeing the Rotunda, seeing Charlemont House, imagining the Blessington Street basin just up the road, Sackville Street, O'Connell Street behind me. It just seemed a natural place to put it, and it seemed like a nice change of scenery after setting the first one in.
Yeah. Another question I want to ask you about the book. I'm sure most people here probably have read the book by now, but for those who haven't, the backdrop of the plot is this group, sinister, fundamentalist group called the Brethren, and they're the bad guys in the story. And Andrew draws 2 or 3 very strong personalities on that sheet, the members of the Brethren. So I'd never heard of the Brethren. I never knew about this body. Tell us a bit about them.
Well, that came out of my research into my first book, which was a social history of Fitzwilliam Square. And in Fitzwilliam Square in the 1820s, this group were founded, an evangelical group, called themselves the Brethren. They later started meeting in England, and their first meetings there took place in Plymouth, and afterwards they were known as the Plymouth Brethren, still today known as the Plymouth Brethren. But their very first meetings happened years before in Fitzwilliam Square. So because of that, because of my research there, I had this group. All I had to do was pluck them out of the 1820s and drop them into 1816, a bit of historical license. But they just seemed this natural antagonistic group for Abigail, who is, so headstrong.
You've eviled them up a lot, though, haven't you?
I've made them more darker than they were. It's funny, from that Fitzwilliam Square book, the most comments I get or letters come from current day Plymouth Brethren members.
Yes.
Because I was able to correct a mistake that they had made in their congregation histories. They all believed that their first meetings took place in a certain house. And because of a strange switch around in house numbers in the 1860s, they had all along been looking at the wrong house. So I was able to correct that for them. And so I got a letter one day from a guy in Northern Ireland, and he introduced this whole thing, and he wanted to see how I got this information and could he confirm it. And we had this great back and forth, and he was delighted with the fact that I was able to correct this mistake in their congregation history.
That's wonderful, yeah.
But I didn't have the heart to tell him that I'd made their group the bad guys. That would have spoiled the moment.
But it's funny, when you do historical fiction, there's always somebody out there who knows more than you do. When I did the first Swallow book, A June of Ordinary Murders, I have our hero, Detective Sergeant Swallow, goes to the Phoenix Park early in the morning, 7:30. He goes up in a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, up to the Chapel Lizard Gate, where two bodies have been found in the copse of trees, and he surveys the scene, and he does what he has to do. The photographer arrives, and then he decides to go down to Kilmainham Station, which in those days was noted in the Dublin Metropolitan Police for the fine breakfasts that they served. But anyway, he gets his driver to take him out the gate anyway, and he's down for 8 o'clock for breakfast. But 6 months after the book was published, I got a telephone call at home from a man. I don't know how he got my number. He said, "Mr. Brady," and I said, "Yes." He said, "You're the fellow who wrote the book about the Phoenix Park?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You have this fella Swallow going in," he said, "in his carriage at 7:30 in the morning into the Phoenix Park through the Island Bridge gate." And I said, "Yes, indeed." He said, "I was the gatekeeper at Island Bridge for 35 years. He says, "That gate never opened before 9 o'clock. So I said, "Look," I said, "I'm very grateful to you." I said, if we do a second edition, I'll make a correction."
Yeah. That's a terrible problem for historical fiction writers. Always having to fact check.
There's somebody out there always who knows more than you do, but
yeah. Somebody pointed out to me that letterboxes weren't invented till 1850.
Oh, really?
I've been using letterboxes throughout. I said, nobody's going to know that.
When I got caught on once, I described Sergeant Swallow as deciding to take the weekend off and go to the Wicklow Hills, and my editor at the time very astutely said the term weekend was not invented at that stage. Let me just go back into the science, as it were, then, and come up to date and maybe look a little forward. Jill, let me just maybe throw this to you first. Obviously, there's been amazing advances in the 20th century. I mean, it is extraordinary even to think that when the Kerry babies case occurred here, which a lot of people here will remember, and I certainly remember as a newsman, I was involved in the coverage of it at the time, but even at that stage, there was no DNA. So that's where we've come in 40 years. Do you want to tell us what you think might be the next big thing on the horizon in terms of forensics and criminal investigation? Do you want to do a little bit of fortune telling?
That's a very good question. It has to be technological, I would think. Yeah, something technological, I'm not sure, but there's the limitations with DNA, because you have to have the DNA sample that you sample from the crime scene,
right,
from the victim, and then you have to match it to a suspect.
Yes.
And that can be quite difficult if you don't have a suspect.
Sure.
Or you might have DNA from the suspect, but you don't have no idea where this person is. So I would have liked there to, not like, but the ideal would be for there to be a database of every single human being, a DNA database.
That's quite an ambition.
Fingerprint database.
Yes, yeah.
But obviously there's a lot of controversy around human rights issues and the safety of the data. and the fact that the data can be misused or abused. So if we could have something like that, then I'm sure it would be much more difficult to get away, and a lot of cold cases could possibly be solved. Yeah.
Well, it's an extraordinary concept, but in my novels, in the Swallow novels, I mean, in the 1880s, we have Harry Lafair, who is the Dublin medical examiner, speculating on the possibility that one day it will be possible to identify people by the ridges on their fingers, and thinking, well, this is actually, this is pure realm of fantasy. But so let me throw that to you, Heidi. What do you think? Fast forward for when you're an old lady and your granddaughter is moving into forensics. What will she be doing?
Well, I think by then probably everything would have been automized.
Yeah.
There'll probably be an AI performing the post-mortem, but
yes.
But nowadays, I mean, we do talk a lot about CT scans and MRI imaging, and a lot of countries use CT scans only to do postmortems. I know, like I went to Switzerland on a ballistics course, and they don't do postmortems on individuals that had gunshot injuries or stab wounds, which is quite strange to me, because I think that you still need to, I mean, the gold standard is still doing the postmortem, but they just do a CT scan, and that's where they'll document the injuries, and then they'll take it to court, and that's how they do their postmortem. So I think we'll probably in the future rely a lot on imaging and digitalizing.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I actually have the answer to the question that I asked you, because I asked my 7-year-old granddaughter this afternoon. I told her what was coming. I said, so if you were a detective and you wanted to invent something which would be really helpful to detectives, what would it be? And she came up with the answer. She said, very simple. She said, time travel, that you could move back and see what actually. So if you were just turn the clock back to the crime scene, and then that would.
Now you never know.
So again with Abigail, I mean, is she going to develop? Are we going to see a lot of advances in her time? You can't leave it where it is.
Well, I'm writing a sequel, so there might be
there you have it.
I was wondering about that.
But whether there's enough time for different advancements in forensics, I'm not so sure. Like, I set the book in 1816 because it was the year without a summer, so I just picked on that event because it created this lovely, eerie, Gothic atmosphere for crime fiction. But then 1816 also happened to be the year of publication of a book called The Epitome of Forensics. It was written by a man called George Mayle, who was a surgeon at the time, and he was absolutely frustrated at the inability of coroners and some inquests to identify cases of murder just because the coroners lacked the medical knowledge. They tended to come from legal backgrounds rather than medical backgrounds. And so Mayle wrote this book, a very clear textbook setting out how to deal with a body when it's discovered, what the marks of various injuries are, what the tests for poisons would be. The test that I mentioned earlier on when I did the reading, that came straight out of Mayle's book. So the timing of it, that was set in that was published in 1816 when I said the book, was brilliant for me, became the textbook for Abigail. So if she does have future forensic adventures, that will be what she'll be referring to.
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, it wouldn't be right just to leave it where it is.
I know.
It's got to go forward from here.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, looking at the I suppose the situation pertaining to serious crime here in this jurisdiction, as both of you have found it. You probably, I think you were saying earlier on before we came in, that you both came expecting Ireland to be a fairly quiet, relatively crime-free society. How do you feel about it now? I mean, has it?
No, it's not that bad.
Yeah.
If you compare it to South Africa, it's not that bad.
Sure. Yes.
Our
Yeah.
point of reference is quite bad. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, we don't do a lot of homicides. We get a lot of suspicious cases,
Yes.
but not a lot of homicides.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
There is an upward trend, though, but one has to consider that the population is increasing and all those factors.
and post-COVID.
Post-COVID, yeah, coming out of isolation, those are all factors that play a role, but it's not out of proportion, you know. I think one does expect over time for things to change. You know, life is not stagnant, and Ireland is expanding. But I'm fresh. I came here in December. Heidi's been here for 4 years, so already I think things have changed a little bit, eh?
Yeah, there's a lot of cases are drug related. That's the problem. So.
I'm thinking about when I was involved in the setting up of the Garda Ombudsman, and we recruited police officers from abroad, including a few from South Africa, to come in, and they thought they were coming to a paradise. Lots of golf and quiet life, and I remember one Australian detective coming back from Donegal, saying he had never seen such wild children in his life. He was planning to go back to Western Australia. As he described them, he said they're feral. But I mean, it's always interesting. Well, Irish people are always interested to know what visitors think of them. But I mean, do you think probably we see our crime situation maybe out of perspective? Do we have an exaggerated sense of the scale of the problem?
I do think so.
You think so?
Yes. I mean, if I compare to even 2018, the amount of cases to what we have now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, you have there is a reason why you do feel that way.
Okay.
So I understand that completely.
Yeah, I mean, looking around the audience, and there's a few people here probably of my own vintage. I mean, I can remember there were many years in this country when I would have been a young journalist where there were no murders at all. And the Garda Commissioner's crime report would say, that he'd send a report into the Minister for Justice. It gives me pleasure to say that this year no murders were reported. And then most years you'd have one or two, and they were nearly all domestics, Some farmer's wife took a pitchfork to him or something like that. And
Yeah.
it usually he needed it. That's look, we've gone up and down over a period of 250 years, and there's a huge amount in between that we haven't been able to focus on. But it's really trying to sort of to spell out the parameters of this thing. We could take the whole evening at it. But look, we're going to draw to a close at that point. I'd just like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank Heidi and Jill for being with us. It's wonderful to be able to put human face to an institution that thankfully very few of us have to engage with directly. I'd just like to acknowledge and salute the important public work that you do. It's hugely important. It can't be easy, and we do very much appreciate the fact that you're there to do it, and grateful and thankful to you for doing it.
Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you for that. And Andrew, we wouldn't be here were it not for you. I know, there's been a genuine appreciation of and warmth towards the book. You've obviously touched a vein with a lot of people. You've given us a wonderful crime story, a wonderful human story, a wonderful insight into part of the history of our city, and in the old phrase, a damn good read. So thank you for that. And the good news is I can tell you there is a sequel. So I'd just like to say to the audience, thank you for being such a great audience. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for engagement. Thank you for being here. And thank you once again to our panel.